Welcome back to another explainer. We've all seen the headlines lately, right? The ones popping up everywhere celebrating that California's housing market is finally showing signs of life and stabilizing after a pretty rough patch. But when you actually peel back the layers of the data, what emerges isn't exactly a unified comeback story. Instead, it's really a tale of two entirely different markets. Today, we're going to dive deep into what the numbers are actually telling us. And specifically, we're going to unpack the towering hurdles facing first-time buyers who are trying desperately to break in.
Okay, let's dive into this. $914,810. Just let that sink in for a second. That was the record median price for an existing single-family home in California as of April 2026. While the annual increase to get there was a relatively modest 0.4%, the raw number alone sets a massive, genuinely intimidating stage. It is absolutely the primary hurdle buyers face, before we even begin to talk about borrowing costs or insurance.
And really, that brings us to the central tension of the current market. We're looking at a system that heavily favors those who are already on the inside. Like if you're an existing homeowner, especially one sitting on significant equity, this market is offering you protection, stability, and growing wealth. But if you're a renter, a middle-class buyer, or a younger Californian just trying to get your foot in the door for the very first time, well, you're facing widening affordability gaps and intense squeezing pressure. The current conditions are essentially benefiting the landed class while actively squeezing out hopeful new entrants.
Section 1. The widening affordability gap.
So diving into the granular data to understand exactly how big the gap between local incomes and home listings has actually become, you might hear that statewide home sales posted their first year-over-year increase of 2026 back in April, rising 4.1%. Sounds great on paper, right? But actually, hold off on the FOMO. This quote-unquote recovery is heavily skewed. The data shows this bump was driven largely by luxury properties priced above $2 million. It was fueled by strong stock market performance and buyers using their existing property equity. Put simply, the people buying right now are mostly the people who already have money and property in the game.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this fascinating new metric developed by the National Association of Realtors and Realtor.com. It's called the Listing Income Alignment Score. It perfectly captures the first-time buyer's struggle because it specifically measures the severe mismatch between what homes cost locally and what the people living there actually earn. It completely cuts right through the noise to show us true affordability.
And here is what that alignment score looks like in Los Angeles, 39.4%. That is, well, it's a painfully low number. It illustrates that the vast majority of listings in major areas like LA, as well as San Diego and Oxnard, are completely financially out of reach for middle-income households. The incomes simply do not support the local home prices. Meaning, for most first-time buyers, the math just fundamentally does not work.
Section 2. Uncertainty and borrowing costs.
Let's shift our focus to the macroeconomic hurdles keeping these buyers sidelined and look at how global uncertainty trickles all the way down to a local mortgage. Mark Zondi, the chief economist at Moody's Analytics, sums up the psychology of the market perfectly here. So the crucial point is exactly what he says. The housing market is extremely vulnerable to uncertainty right now because consumers just don't make major financial decisions when they feel the ground shifting underneath them. Broader instability in the national and global economy is weighing heavily on your local housing market. Rising geopolitical tensions, the expanding Middle East conflict, and volatile oil and treasury markets are completely freezing buyer confidence. When the world feels unsteady, people simply don't sign 30-year mortgages.
Lawrence Yun, the chief economist for the National Association of Realtors, echoes this exact sentiment. He notes there are buyers waiting, but affordability and mortgage rates continue to prevent many from moving forward. This proves that the demand absolutely exists underneath the surface. People want to buy homes, but the crushing combination of those macroeconomic-driven mortgage rates combined with record-high prices creates what feels like an insurmountable wall for market entry.
Section 3. The hidden insurance shock.
And this brilliantly illustrates a massive, often ignored hurdle hitting the California market specifically this fall. Consider the impending shock to the system. You don't just pay a mortgage, you have to insure the home. The California Fair Plan, which is the state's insurer of last resort, is expected to raise premiums by nearly 30% this fall. And if you're trying to buy in a wildfire zone, you are looking at premium hikes between 30 and 50%. Think about the compounding effect here. When you combine those record-breaking home prices and high mortgage rates with these skyrocketing insurance premiums, it adds a massive, recurring monthly cost. It's like throwing yet another heavy layer of unaffordability right onto the backs of new buyers.
Section 4. Slowing construction limits relief.
With prices high and demand waiting,
You'd think new homes had come to the rescue, right? But builders are actually retreating right now. Single-family housing permits just dropped to their lowest level in 8 months. Let's move to the supply side and see how this builds out the rest of the picture. Why are they pulling back? Because builders are fighting the exact same economic headwinds. They're dealing with elevated material costs, extremely expensive financing for their own construction loans, and they see the softening affordability of their target buyers. If builders aren't building, supply remains tight, and those high prices are basically going to stay locked in.
Section 5. A theoretical recovery.
So, let's bring the narrative back to our overarching theme. We have a market that looks stable on paper, but feels entirely broken in practice. When we take all of these data points together, this is the market reality we're left with. On one hand, yes, the market is no longer collapsing. The freefall has been avoided and there is stability at the top. But on the other hand, it is hardly healthy. Between record prices, volatile mortgage rates, skyrocketing insurance premiums, and stalled construction, the environment remains incredibly hostile to anyone trying to enter for the first time. Which leaves us with this final, vital question based on the data we just went through. If you are trying to buy into the California market for the very first time, is this recovery largely theoretical? Does the stabilized market even matter to you if the gates are securely locked to new entrants? It's definitely something to think about the next time you see headlines celebrating a housing rebound. Consider who the market is actually built for. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.